So unlocking performance. This session today is going to really speak to a couple of primary topics, all underpinned around some primary research that we did with our partners at 6 Seconds. And 6 Seconds is the largest emotional intelligence tool organization in the world. And Careerlink is a preferred partner representing Australia for 6 Seconds. And one of their primary statements, which I absolutely love, is that emotions drive people and people drive performance. And with Careerlink's mission in life of creating a performance revolution, it obviously attracted us to 6 Seconds as we were really looking for a tool. As you may or may not know, Angela Giacomis, the CEO at Careerlink, has been accredited and working in emotional intelligence for several years. But she was working with a tool that didn't really provide the development capabilities. And so as we went out and started looking for those kinds of resources, we found 6 Seconds and partnered with them, I guess about a year ago now. And 6 Seconds then has worked with us. They have a very leading edge analytical group that sits in Italy, and they work with kind of the newest tools and methodologies for doing emotional or neuroscience analytics. And so I'll get into more of that as we go, but the primary research that we did actually brought out some very interesting findings that I think will start to at least hopefully bring you value in the way you think about leadership and how we may need to think differently moving forward. So let me go ahead then and jump into how we'll do this. First, we're going to go through kind of the business case for emotional intelligence, so you can kind of understand the justification of why this is so important. We'll define what emotional intelligence is. I'm going to talk a bit about emotional agility, which emotional intelligence is a piece of as we go through this, and talk about why this works. Why is it important and why does it work? How does it work? And then we'll get into the primary research around both performance and then some really interesting findings that we got out of unscheduled leave as we started to look at health and wellness of the participants in the research, which I'll speak to as we get to the research piece as well. But the biggest thing that I'd like you to take away from today, if there was only one thing, it's really to think differently about leadership and about what's happening in the world of work today and how it's being managed to drive performance. So really, to me, it's about thinking differently. So why now? I mean, it seems like emotional intelligence and change is like the hot topic, the buzzword in business today. And why is it happening? Emotional intelligence has been around forever, and but now all of a sudden it seems to be getting traction. In fact, I think that the original book, Emotional Intelligence, was written in the late 80s by Daniel Goleman, who popularized emotional intelligence. So it's been around a long time. So why now? Well, here's why now. The technology revolution that we've all been living through has gotten to a point where the technologies are literally building on themselves. Technology is building new technology, which is building new technology at an exponential pace. As a result of that, new products and services are entering the market at rates that we've never seen before in history. That's actually creating new customer expectations. So the customers that may be working in or experiencing or participating in social media or some other service, maybe not even related to your industry, but they're doing things online now that's better, faster, cheaper than they've ever been able to do it before, which changes the expectation on what they expect from your organization. Now, the result of that is certainly a huge impact in what is necessary from a technology perspective in your organization, but it's creating new workforce requirements. And our workforces are having a very difficult time keeping up with that. So the chart that we've got in front of us right now is just to kind of highlight what's going on and why this is really, or what the impact really is to our people. So on the top left is the US patents filed, kind of decade on decade, and you can see the exponential pace, kind of hockey stick pace of patent filings going on. So this is going to represent really technology evolution and the speed of technology innovation that's transpiring. Now that's actually starting to trigger future and the way that investors are thinking about business, which on the bottom left is the New York Stock Exchange volume of shares traded. You can see that that's a hockey stick as well. And then on the top right, it's mergers and acquisitions. And mergers and acquisitions are accelerating because organizations cannot possibly keep up with the innovation speed, so they're having to buy the technologies. So therefore, you start to see the M&A activity accelerating through. Now, in the gray box there is some statistics that came from the Australian Human Rights Commission on mental health and stress in the workforce. And you can see, you can read this as easy as I can, huge impact. Stress claims have doubled in recent years. 25% of workers took time off this year for stress reasons. Almost 50% of Australians will experience mental health in their lifetime. And the cost to business this year is $6.5 billion or more. So huge impact on the workforce and our people. And the question then becomes, how do things change? How do we actually start to think about business differently? And I think that the research will start to show some of those pieces. So let me jump real quick to a quick survey, because this starts to speak to how are we going to lead things differently and what capabilities is it going to take for our leaders. So what I'd like to ask you to do is to go through this, look at the 5 items that we've listed here. There's certainly a lot more attributes that we should be looking at, but unfortunately the survey only allowed us to do, or the poll only allowed us to do 5. So if you could go through and just click on one or more of these attributes. So what would you say are the top 2 leadership attributes that are necessary in the 21st century? Okay, I think everybody's got that now. So so let me see if we can actually share this now. So 82% said adaptability. 55%. So number 2 was 360-degree thinking. Then empathy. Then curiosity or intellectual curiosity, and then cultural competency. So so that's interesting. It's fairly close. So let's close this and jump back over then to the presentation. And let's go to the next slide here. So there was a recent Harvard Business Review article written. It was just last month, September, and the title of it was "Empathy is Still Lacking in the Leaders Who Need It the Most." And but yet empathy, even in our survey, showed up as number 5. And it was number 5 in the list in this article as well. Adaptability was number 1 on our list. Adaptability was there. There was a little bit of difference in the middle 3. But it is interesting because when you start to think about the capabilities that are necessary, they really do come down to things that are emotionally driven. And I will talk about emotional agility here in just a second. But they are emotionally driven much more than typical skill set or cognitive thinking and capabilities around that. And in fact, when you look at IQ, once you hit about 115 IQ, anything above that is really not important in an executive or senior role, because that's the level of IQ that's necessary to actually do those tasks as a senior executive. Beyond that, it's around EQ and the level of EQ an individual has. And you'll see as we start to get into some of these capabilities, these are the ones that can get measured and managed and developed through emotional intelligence. So these are the ones. So what does this mean really when you start thinking of the speed of change and all that's going to be required from a leadership perspective and what's happening in business today with technology advancement and the workforce requirements? The fact is that it's going to create huge challenges for us. The world that we actually live in today is really volatile. It's very uncertain. Because the speed of change is so fast, we don't really know what's happening. It's complex. There's more and more layers being layered on top of leadership and the things we have to think through. And it's ambiguous. We really don't know what the next change is going to be for us. And I think Gary Hamel, who wrote the book, What Matters Now, and what Gary really talks about and what his book was about is really about looking forward, more of a visionary statement about what the world of work is going to look like as we move forward and what the requirements are going to be and how ill-equipped our world really is as we move forward. And the world is becoming more turbulent faster than most organizations are becoming more resilient. And so the changes that we are going to go through and that we have to prepare for are really things that are even very difficult for us to even think through. So why should we care about emotional intelligence? Why is this important? This is supposed to be the soft stuff, and so what I'm going to try to do as a left brain thinker myself is go to the hard things, right? So I want to put hard statistics to what can be considered soft skills, although arguably sometimes courageous conversations are a lot harder than cognitive skills might require. On the top left is a regression analysis, and so for those that are not left brain thinkers, a regression analysis is a simple analysis that measures correlation of two things. So on the bottom of that chart, it says emotional intelligence scores. And on the right-hand side, on the vertical going up, it's performance scores, performance outcome scores. So what this is correlating is the correlation between the level of EQ, or emotional intelligence, to the level of performance. And as you can see, there is an absolute correlation. There's a 60% correlation. If it was, in the high teens, it would be considered as a statistically significant correlation. This is off the charts. This basically says that the higher the EQ, the higher the performance. It's really that simple. Now, that becomes very relevant inside of organizations. And we put a chart together here that is probably kind of a mid-market size organization with an annual labor spend of about $10 million. And what I wanted to show here was really that there is very high sensitivity in performance as an impact in labor. So if you were able to improve performance, say by 10% in your organization, which you should be able to do in a lot of different ways by engaging the organization more effectively, implementing new technologies, etc., you could actually increase or decrease your labor spend by $1 million, really, because you're getting more productive. You're either going to do more volume, or you're going to do less labor, or a combination of the two, more likely, right? But you could bring $1 million to your bottom line by doing that. But conversely, the same thing is true. So if you we're out doing cost-cutting measures or whatever it is in the organization that decreases performance, any cost savings you may think that you're realizing, you actually could lose in the process by decreasing performance equally. So this becomes quite significant when you start looking at performance and managing performance in the organization. So this is an example of a recent client that we had. They're a national insurance organization, and all we did was to go into the organization and did two primary things. One is that we integrated emotional intelligence learning with sales training. The second thing we did, though, I think is even more significant, which is that we aligned the purpose of the individual in 6 seconds language. In their model, it would be called the noble goal. So their noble goal or their purpose in life to that of the organizations, the purpose of the organizations. And that alignment actually creates intrinsic motivation and starts driving people differently than they had before. The impact that this had was unbelievable. There was and by the way, so in the performance year, which wasn't even a full performance year, there was a 28% increase on year-on-year sales. And what was more interesting about it is that it's been sustained. So very, very interesting engagement in modeling what actually happens when you start to think about things a little bit differently. You could certainly have similar results by doing different things in your organization similar to this. But the bottom line is that by driving up performance, you actually drive or can drive labor costs down while improving service excellence or sales excellence, depending on your organization, what you're trying to accomplish. So as you increase performance, these other elements increase with that, but you can also be driving costs down in parallel to that. In other words, doing more with less. There was an article we just put out earlier this week on doing more with less. And I'm not sure if we're able to share that online now. It's something we've loaded into the thing. But what we will do is we will make sure that this gets emailed out to everybody following the presentation today. So you have a copy of that. So what I want to talk about then is emotional agility. So what's emotional intelligence and what's emotional agility? Emotional agility is really an organization's ability to be much more agile based on 3 primary components. The first one is purpose. And the purpose of the organization is highly important because it actually starts to give people a reason to want to be there. Some people can talk about it as an internal brand. We actually believe that the internal and external brand should be the same thing, so that you're really managing one brand and that the company actually stands for something. A word that I like to use personally is cause. What is the cause of the organization? And it really doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be we're going to save the world. It doesn't have to be that it's about the green movement or those kinds of more philanthropic movements. It can be something that's very more business oriented and hard driving. It may be the kind of the David and Goliath thing, that we're the small guy on the block and we want to beat the biggest competitor. And as long as it's something that people can get behind and attach to, it's relevant. We want to bring a new service to families or to the consumer market. People can get behind that. Purpose becomes highly important. And it's not just purpose of the organization then. It is about aligning that purpose to the people in the organization and their purpose. And that alignment creates a high level of intrinsic motivation in the organization and a high level of drive. The second is a growth mindset. And a growth mindset, it's actually terminology that Carol Dweck, a professor at Stanford University, coined in the educational space. But organizations really need to have this mindset about learning, that we're not rigid, we're not fixed. It isn't business as usual. It's not that we have this rigid process and the way things have to get done. Yes, we all have to have process and procedures, But with the speed of change today, we have to have this growth mindset. We have to be able to learn, unlearn, and relearn faster than anybody else can. And that is going to bring huge advantage in organizations and being able to manage through change as we move forward. And the last element here is emotional intelligence, which really is the underpinning of all of it. It's the foundation that actually makes all of this pull together and work. Now, let me throw out another survey here. So the second survey is, does your company have emotional intelligence? So if you guys can help me out, just let me know, does your organization, emotional agility, does your organization today have emotional agility? Do you understand what the purpose of the organization is? Is there alignment? Is there an understanding of this kind of learning and this is not business as usual thought process? And are you guys working with emotional intelligence in the organization? So actually it's pretty high. Not quite there yet. We don't have everybody that's voted, but 83% have voted, it looks like, 92, and we have 100. So 58% said that yes, that they feel like they have emotional agility in the organization. 42% said no. My guess is that that's probably highly slanted because people that are on the webinar have been working with us in some of this stuff, and therefore kind of skewing the result. I think if you looked at organizations across Australia, it would look significantly different than this. I think that most of the people that are on this call today are well ahead of the curve on these elements and moving forward, which is why they're on the call today. All right, so if we're talking about the foundation being emotional intelligence, what is emotional intelligence? Well, emotional intelligence is simply put, it is the ability to understand, manage, and manage your emotions. So understand and manage your own emotions, and understand, recognize, and influence the emotions of others. And which is critically important if you think about it as a leader. I need to be able to recognize and understand when one of my people is derailed for whatever reason, or where there's just something going on with them. Do I have that emotional literacy to see that? Can I recognize that? Can I recognize the patterns that every time this person gets into this situation that this is kind of the outcome of that? And can I influence those emotions to adjust and shift that person into the right direction? Those are not hard skill items that we would consider hard skill or cognitive skills. Those are emotional skills and the ability to actually manage emotion. All right, I think I'm going to get forced into this. Apologize, folks, a little technical difficulty. We're not going to watch a video. Maybe we are. We seem to be in tech. Speaking of technology advancements. All right, so let's go to the 6 seconds model for emotional intelligence. There are 3 primary areas that they break down. One is what we do or what we know, which really is, stems around know yourself. The next one is choose yourself, which is what we actually do or what we choose. So once we understand ourselves, do we have the self-management capability? So it's about self-awareness and then self-management. And then lastly is why do we do it? What is the purpose? What is our own noble goal and the purpose of why we're on this earth? And then linked to that is empathy as well. So those are the three primary areas. So let's go into the model itself and around that so that we can understand it. All right. So the reason that this is important is because this starts to provide the underpinning for the research that we're about to talk through. And I want to make sure that everybody understands what emotional intelligence is, what the capabilities are within emotional intelligence. As we get into the results, you'll actually be able to relate to it, I think, a little bit more effectively. So we've talked about know yourself. So the two capabilities in know yourself is emotional literacy and your ability to recognize patterns. So recognizing patterns is maybe a little explanation. So that's going to be more around reoccurring dialogues. Every time I have this dialogue going with, or I get in the same argument with my partner, or with a coworker, or every time this person is late for a meeting and I say something, there's this reaction. And being able to recognize those patterns and actually be able to shift through that. So that's around the know yourself. So that's the self-awareness, emotional literacy, knowing myself, understanding how I'm feeling, understanding how someone else may be feeling. Sometimes that's kind of around walking into the room and knowing, just feeling what's going on in there. And then the next one is choose yourself. So once I understand things now what am I going to choose to do from a reaction or response perspective? There's 4 capabilities in this area. The first one is consequential thinking. And that one's pretty straightforward, I think. Do I actually look at the checks and balances, or puts and takes, if you will, the pros and cons of any decision that I'm making? The next is navigating emotions. So if I get into a situation or I get triggered, do I have the ability to actually navigate through that? The next one is intrinsic motivation. We talked a little bit about this one. It's critically important, obviously. And then optimism, your ability to look at the future with hope and possibility. Especially in times today, that's highly important. And then it is about give yourself. So it's increased empathy, or your empathy itself, empathy for others, which is really your ability to feel with others and connect with others. And then lastly is noble goal, which is your purpose. Now, I wanted to give you a little bit of insight of why these are important from a leadership perspective and how they connect together. So that as we get into the results again, that you can actually start to see the relevance. So I'm just going to give you 3 examples of how these might work together. So the first example is around somebody's emotional well-being, maybe, and the way that they respond in situations. There are 3 capabilities that actually drive this that we can measure. So emotional literacy, their ability to navigate emotions, and their empathy. So those 3 capabilities, based on the scores we could look at, we could actually predict or help people develop this capability, or this I'll say leadership attribute. The next one is around decision making. So your ability to make decisions is highly related to your ability to recognize patterns, consequential thinking, and optimism. So I can give you some examples of this. If I've got low recognition of patterns, which this individual here does, and I had lower consequential thinking with high optimism, then my decision making is likely going to be very, glasses half full. I look at things through rose-colored glasses. I'm quick to make a decision without really thinking through what the consequences might be of not achieving it, or how it might impact people. We need to make cuts in an organization. Yep, here it is. It's pretty clean, straightforward. I know it's going to work. I know we're going to move this thing forward. Boy, there's my optimism. Haven't really thought through the implications of it yet. So then the next one is drive. And drive is connected to your intrinsic motivation, optimism, and your purpose, or your noble goal. Those 3 elements together create the fire in the belly that bring people to work, whether they're sick or not sick. So again, as you start to look at these things, if we want to develop people, we can actually look at the capabilities and provide leadership, coaching, and training to improve different primary capabilities. Okay, so with that underpinning, let's go ahead and jump into to the research itself. There were two primary things that we set out to look at in the research, and in fact, when we first thought of this research and working with 6 Seconds to do the analysis, we really came at it from some clients that were concerned about unscheduled leave, both with our staff people as well as their own employees. And so what we did is we went out to our pool of employees and we said, we'll give you a free emotional intelligence assessment, anybody that's interested. About 50% of them took us up on that offer. With that, we took all of the data and we sent that off to 6 Seconds, analytical group in Italy, and they did an analysis based on two primary methodologies. One is the regression analysis, which we talked about earlier, that measures correlation of things, and the other is a new methodology called the neural network analysis. And this is what's being used in machine learning around neuroscience. So it's mapping the brain basically. So it actually can predict impact. So we looked at both correlation and impact across a number of these, all of the 8 capabilities, and then some of the leadership, primary leadership capabilities, which we'll get into. What was surprising to me about this whole thing, though, is while we went into it really looking at unscheduled leave, really at the last minute I said, look, while we're doing this, let's actually look and see, we're so focused on performance with our clients, why don't we look at what the impact of performance is? So whatever their scores are, let's do the same thing across these capabilities and look at what is impacting performance and how we may be able to improve capability to do that. So we threw that in kind of at the last minute, and actually the findings were astronomical from my perspective. So this is a summary slide. So I'm going to start at the summary and then I'll get into the detail with you. On the left here is success factors, and this is kind of established by 6 Seconds that these are the 6 primary success factors in life, or really leadership, but leadership from a business perspective and leadership from a life perspective. But it's decision making, effectiveness, your ability to influence, your health or wellness, your ability to connect and manage relationships, and quality of life. And quality of life really is about life balance. They found that there was a 64.8% correlation between the level of EQ that the participants had and the level of their success factors, the scores that they had in those 6 areas. That's not too surprising because we know that the EQ level to life performance was a 60% correlation. So it's not surprising that it would be a 64.8% correlation between those. The other 2 pieces, as a past management consultant for a number of years working with large organizations, this to me is like the holy grail. This is like a roadmap to increasing performance. The next cell there, they're talking about the potential growth of the group considered in this analysis is 9.7%. So what they're saying there is that we can impact performance 9.7%, or very close to that 10% mark we talked about earlier, by focusing on 3 things, which are over on the right: emotional insights, collaboration, and proactivity. Now, this may be different in different organizations and different groups of people, or what are the things are that we have to focus on. The thing that was really revolutionary for me was that we now have tools that we can access to actually measure how to increase performance in organizations. And when you look at those capabilities, certainly there's training programs that we could put in place to go and address that. But it's also in your team leaders and the people that are working with your line level people and your leadership that's working with mid-management and those team leaders to drive and manage and model these elements for them. So you actually integrate it into the organization. So let me just kind of jump in then as we go through this. So this is on the left is the regression analysis that's measuring the 64.8%. Over on the right side, though, this is now the 6 seconds model that we just went through. So what they're saying is that there were 3 primary capabilities that influenced the correlation, and it was intrinsic motivation, emotional literacy, and recognition of patterns. So now we can actually work on an individual level and coach people or develop people in the specific competencies of intrinsic motivation, emotional literacy, and recognition of patterns. Then they looked at what were the high and low scores of the total group, and they took the top 25% and the bottom 25%. As you sit back and you kind of look at that, for me at least, it took me a little while to look at it and say, okay, so what? What is this actually saying? What does it actually mean? Well, it means for me 2 things. One is it means that with these kinds of tools, that we could actually impact our hiring capability tremendously if we did some analytics up front around people and hire people with higher levels of EQ. But it also is saying that there's a lot of opportunity in developing people with the lower EQ scores. Remember, with emotional intelligence versus IQ, so EQ versus IQ is fixed. Your IQ is your IQ. But EQ is actually something you can develop. It's basically taking maturity and accelerating it. It is one way to maybe think about it. But you can actually develop these capabilities as you go. And if you're focused on it, you can develop them a lot quicker. So there's a huge opportunity to bring that lower 25% up, even to average, and then start to accelerate averages upward as well. So we can actually grow the level of emotional intelligence, and this is saying there's big opportunity to do that. All right, so for the sake of time here, I wanted to accelerate kind of how do we get through all the different capability or all the success metrics here. So what I did is I just took the same slide and I laid this out, and there was 6 of them, if you remember: decision making, influence, effectiveness, health, quality of life, and relationships. In all cases, there was a beyond significant correlation between the level or score of that capability and the score of the success metric, or the success factor. So 63% in decision making as an example, 47.6% in influence, 45.7% in effectiveness, and so on. The thing that was interesting in this, though, is not as much as the correlations. They're all significant. It was more in the capabilities that had the highest impact on the score itself. And as you went through each one, I started seeing a lot of consistency in what they were. And so I started mapping it out. There were basically 5 primary competencies to focus on if you wanted to lift the total score. The first one was intrinsic motivation, emotional literacy, and recognition of patterns. And if you remember up front, those were the first 3 that they actually outlined. The 2, number 4 and 5, that came after was optimism and consequential thinking. So those 5 really spanned across the majority of the success factors. But the last one that we actually put this one in, because purpose provides the foundation, or if you think of it kind of as a ballast on a sailboat, it's the thing that keeps us pointed in the right direction. So purpose, without focusing on purpose, is very difficult to lift the other competencies. So we would say we need to focus on purpose and those 5 competencies to actually drive as much impact as possible in the success factors. So let's make a shift now to the unscheduled leave side of this. There was a 7% inverse correlation between absenteeism and health. Okay, so that means that if health goes up, absenteeism goes back down. So there's an inverse correlation to that. So health goes up, health score goes up, absenteeism goes down. Not hard to believe. The 7% is a neural network analysis, so that's the impact score, not the correlation, which you'll see here in a bit. And they found that there was a 36% correlation, or that EQ predicted 36% of the health variation. So the correlation was basically 36%, and the high and low scores were much closer. There's still a deviation difference there, but much closer between high and low scores with this. So you look at it overall, yeah, it makes sense. Okay, so what? As we went down into the detail, though, this is where it started to get interesting and started to talk specifically to the way in which we're leading people. So the first one is speaking to the thing we just talked through, right? So it's absenteeism. The second item there is the days worked. So work days is negatively related to intrinsic motivation, and there's a 31% correlation, which is huge. So negatively impacted. So that means that the more days that are worked, the lower intrinsic motivation. So the more days that are worked on the job, lower intrinsic motivation. So that says now all of a sudden, wow, what does that say about the culture that we're working in, and and what that's doing to my motivation? So here's a statistic that can actually tell us how we're doing from a cultural perspective in motivating our workers, right? Now, clearly, as these are temp employees, so it's a difficult environment anyways. They're in different organizations across the state, but it does speak to us as well and tells us as an organization, hey, you know what? There's things we have to be doing now to drive motivation in our workforce, because the higher the motivation is, the lower unscheduled leave in the client's offices. So something that we're cleanly focused on, but it does start to tell us we gotta do something a little bit differently here. The next one is late for work was positively related to optimism. Okay, wait a minute. So that's saying that the more days that a person was late for work, the higher their optimism. So if I've got high optimism, I'm going to be late for work more often. And that's kind of counterintuitive. You think about it, it's, well, if they had high optimism, you'd think they'd be to work on time. But no, actually, it's, you know what, it's okay. I've got time for that cup of coffee on the way to work, or time to visit for a second, or whatever it happens to be. They think it's just going to be okay. So here's what's dangerous is when you look at old management styles that are more authoritative, and we've got process, and you're supposed to be to work at 8 o'clock, and somebody walks in and it's 10 minutes after 8, and I jump on them about that, you're actually going to start driving down optimism, which is not what you want to do as an organization. So the way in which, not that you just say, hey, let them go, they can show up whenever they want to show up. Although some organizations have it that way, as long as they're getting their job done, they can show up when they want to, depending on the role, obviously. But it does get us to start thinking about, you know what, we need to manage this differently. It's about how we manage it and making sure they understand why it's important they're there. If they're a call center person, as an example, it may be very important because you've got customers there and that's aligning to the purpose. But that's the dialogue, not why aren't you here at 8? It's a very different feel to the conversation. The next one is left early for work is positively related to navigating emotions. So the better I am at navigating emotions, the higher the score I have on navigating emotions, the more often I'm late for work. So then you'd think, well, wait a minute. If I could navigate emotions, then why would I have to, leave work early? Well, it's because they actually have that awareness. And as they're navigating through emotions, they understand that, you know what, I am going to navigate. I'm going to opt out. That's how I'm going to navigate this emotion. I'm getting frustrated. I'm overwhelmed. I'm going to opt out. I'm going to leave work. And they're doing that. Now, again, from a management perspective, if you start seeing people leaving work early more often, that should be a flag. That's a recognition of patterns to say, what's going on here, right? It should be a trigger for you to actually sit down with them and not be upset and hammer them about leaving work early, but to go deeper than that. Why are they doing it, right? It's a different conversation to be having as leaders. So, and it starts to get back to when we scored our leadership pieces up front, where empathy was one of the factors in there. Having empathy at a level with the individual, not to say, hey, it's okay, but to understand deeper what's going on. If a courageous conversation has to be had, you can have it, but it really is, again, in the how and really going a layer deeper on why and what's going on with that individual. So in summary, change is accelerating and it's negatively impacting our workforces. There's a very strong correlation that exists between EQ and performance, which could lead to substantial labor cost reductions or increases by that matter if we're not tending to it. EQ impacts sales and service excellence. There's a strong correlation between EQ and leadership success factors. Statistically valid, we've got statistically valid roadmaps now to increase performance. And we need to think differently about the way we're managing people. So we've got some time for questions. If anybody's got questions, we can, if you'll go to your chat window and you can type them into the chat window, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. I think we've got just about 5 or 10 minutes to go here. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any questions coming up. So with that, I think we'll just sign off. And if you guys have questions afterwards, everybody has our contact information, I know. So feel free to give us a call or shoot us an email, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have with this. And again, there's the article on Do More with Less. We'll forward that out. If you haven't joined the conversation, give us an email and we'd be happy to put you on our communication stream around emotional intelligence and driving performance. Thank you so much for attending, and I appreciate it, and we'll make sure that we notify you for the next one.